Hey everyone, welcome back to Ontario Gardening. Today we are doing, as promised, a no knead and no mixer white bread. So last week we did one in the mixer and I showed you how to do that really quick. This one is a no knead bread, and because of that, it does take a little bit longer. So that's the difference between using your mixer and using this method here, is that this one is going to take a little bit longer to proof than the other one would. So this recipe is super easy, super delicious, and it's just a little bit different than that other recipe. So for this, you are going to need 2 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, a tablespoon of sugar, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of instant yeast, about a teaspoon of butter, and then you're going to need 3/4 cup of water and 1/2 cup of milk. And the milk doesn't matter, whatever you have on hand. So making this bread, tools that make things. So it's going to make a loaf of bread. I just use like a banana pan type bread pan. And tools to make your life easier would be a little bit bigger of a measuring cup to pour these two liquids into, a thermometer, a spatula, and you're going to need either a damp cloth or some saran wrap to put over top while you're proofing your bread. Usually a damp cloth is the best method, but we have retrievers around here, and if you know, it doesn't matter how clean your house is, a damp towel is just going to attract that dog hair. So I hate using cling wrap, but I use it. So what we're going to do first is we've got our 2 3/4 cup of flour into a bowl. I am going to mix the dry ingredients in here and I'm going to whisk them together. So we've got that tablespoon of sugar, the teaspoon of salt, and the teaspoon of instant yeast. And I just want to say that I have only ever used this recipe with instant yeast. I don't know about using a different yeast, like a regular yeast. But I use instant just to make sure that this is going to be a quick rise bread. So I'm just whisking all of these dry ingredients together. And that's it. Now at this point, I am going to add the wet ingredients to it, but first I need to warm them up. So this is where I say a thermometer comes in handy because you really want to make it warm into a blood temperature. So the reason I said I have this is because I'm just going to combine the two liquids and try to, instead of trying to warm them up separately. So I've got my 3/4 cup of water, and I'm just going to mix that with my 1/2 cup of milk in the same container. And at this point, I want to get it to, they say blood temperature. I'm going to say around 98 degrees, no more than 100 degrees. And then we're going to mix that into our dry mix. So I'm going to throw this in the microwave until it reaches that blood temperature. Okay, so I've got the water just under 98 degrees. You don't need a thermometer. You can really just do it with your finger and just feel it. And you just want it to be like mildly warm. Okay, so now we're going to mix that into our dry mix here. And I'm going to use the spatula to start mixing it until I can get a workable dough, and then I'll use my hands. So we're going to start mixing that. And as you can see, it starts to form this dough. And once I've got it kind of scraped from the sides, at that point I'm going to switch over and start using my hands. And it's going to be a sticky dough. That's why we have the butter actually. I'll show you in a minute. So we're going to keep working that, mixing it around. It's sticky and crumbly, and that's okay. Making sure to get all that flour off the bottom until it starts to form. And we're going to keep doing that, and your hands are going to be a giant mess. This is the most quote-unquote kneading that we're going to do in this process, is just to get the ball formed into some sort of dough. Okay, so at this point, we have got our dough. As you can see, it's starting to form here. It's still a little bit sticky, and that's okay, because what we're going to do at this point is try and get as much as you can off your fingers. And we're gonna come to this butter, grab the butter, and we're gonna kind of mush it into our hands and make like a paste. Put some at the top, some at the bottom, and that's how we're gonna start working that into the dough. Like making sure to get that flour off the side of the bowl. But we're working that into the dough, and this is gonna make sure that it forms properly. It gets rid of like the dry or the sticky, depending on what your dough looks like, and actually makes a dough, as you can see. So this is it here. We're pretty much at this point, to the point that we want to be, just making sure to clean off the sides of those bowl, just to make sure you got everything incorporated in there. And there we go. So now we're gonna just form it into a ball here. We're gonna put it into our bowl. And now at this point you put over your damp cloth or your saran wrap, whatever you're using. Gonna leave it in a nice warm place to proof. And you're gonna leave that for 5 to 6 hours. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. And we will see you in 5 to 6 hours once it's risen and start to the next step and get baking. Okay, so it's been about 6 hours and we are now going to take our cover off of our bread. And at this point, as you can see, it's risen. So it's gonna still be a little sticky, but we're gonna pull it out and put it onto a floured surface. Let it plop out. We're saving this bowl because we're gonna need it again. And we are just going to kind of fold it like this a few times over, just like this, pulling out the outsides, just like this, until we kind of have the whole middle into the center. Pulling it just a few times until we've kind of wrapped it up. Now we're gonna flip it over, take your hands into 2 cups and kind of come underneath and cup it like this, putting it into a circle. So you're kind of cupping and folding underneath as you turn your hands. It's the easiest way to get a ball. And then once you have your ball, we're gonna put it in seam side down, so the ball's standing up. And we are going to cover it again. And at this point, we are letting it sit and proof again for another hour. So we will be back in an hour to shape it and put it into the pan. Okay, so we've let it sit for an hour, and I just want to make note that your bread is not going to rise insane like other bread recipes are. It's okay if it stays not as big as you've seen like with other bread recipes. It's one loaf and it's a pretty dense dough. So don't worry about it. It's not going to affect the flavor or the way it bakes, but you've got it to rise a little bit more after the hour. We're going to take this out of the bowl, and this is now, we're done with the bowl. This is what's going to go into this bread pan. So we're going to shape it to make it fit squarely into the bread pan. So I just like to kind of make it into an oval. We're keeping that seam on the bottom. Make it into an oval, kind of press it out a bit. You could even roll it a little bit if you wanted to, just to kind of get more of like a loaf shape. And we're just kind of getting some of that air out and shaping it to the bread pan. So what we're going to do before I put this in here is I want to grease that pan. And you can do that with cooking spray, or you can use butter and grease it, but just make sure it's greased before we put this in. And we're going to put it into our loaf pan, and we're just going to kind of press it in here to kind of shape it to the pan. And at this point, we're going to do one last proof, and this is why if you have a kneader, it is a little bit better. It doesn't take all day to do the bread, but if you're home or whatever, this is no big deal. Use that piece of saran wrap or your damp towel again and let it proof for 1 more hour. And at the last half an hour, as this is proofing, we're going to preheat our oven to 375 degrees. Okay, so we are done rising the last proof here. I'm going to take this off. As you can see, it's kind of formed its own little shape in here. And we are going to throw this bad boy at that 375 degree oven for 35 minutes. And when we're done, I will show you what it looks like, cut into it, and love on this bread. See you soon. All right, the bread has cooled and we have sliced into it. So it's a good size sandwich bread, but it's not as big as the loaf from last week. That one is a lot bigger. This one's more like Villaggio, if you guys have that type of bread. But either way, it's delicious. It's fluffy. It's soft. It's great if you don't have a mixer, because that is the point of it. No knead, no mixed bread. We will see you next week when we tackle bagels. Talk to you later. Bye.